Go ahead, Ashley.
All right, well, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to give you guys an update of our vaccine research and where we're at with our RHDV2 vaccine for rabbits. I will be turning off my video right now so we can do the presentation, but feel free. I will kind of have some stopping points so that questions can be asked. And again, you can use that chat. So I'll try to address questions in segments so that things don't get lost over the course of the presentation. So I will stop my video and start the presentation. So what is rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus? So the virus itself is an RNA virus. We have a pretty picture of the actual virus right here. It is a Lego virus in the family Caliciviridae. And there are more than just RHDV2. I'm sure a lot of you know of RHDV1, but there's also an RHDV1A. So there is the possibility that over time there will be more strains of RHD. So that kind of ties into how our vaccine technology is really great for this sort of thing. The technology that we use is a Baclovirus expression system, and we just need the sequence of one of these outer proteins on the virus to make our vaccines. So when something on one of these outer proteins changes and changes the virus enough for it to be a different strain, we can easily update our vaccine to be protective against that specific strain. So that's in a nutshell when she said immunological services provider. That's our IS prime process where we monitor strains of viruses and make sure our vaccines are still working. And when there's a new strain, we can update it for that and keep on top of diseases. So that is what IS prime means. As the virus gets into the rabbit population, it has been known to affect European cottontails and domestic rabbits. But RHDV2 is unique and it has been shown to affect other rabbit species that RHDV1 was not able to affect. And there's also evidence that some badgers fell ill to RHDV2 as well. So it was first reported in France in 2010. And again, as I mentioned, it affects a wider range of species than RHDV1 appeared to. It has caused deaths in native North American rabbit species, which again, RHDV1 did not. The RHDV2 is responsible for outbreaks in Washington, Mexico, the Southwest, and Eastern United States. And as we progress through time, it seems like more states and more areas see this virus. It's not really known when it will hit a new area, and how it's really getting to new areas is not fully understood as well. So a lot of biosecurity I know you guys are using to try to keep it out of your animals. And unless you use the vaccine, that's probably what you're going to have to do, is really high biosecurity to try to reduce the risk of your rabbits getting infected with RHDV2, because you just never know where it's going to pop up next. Also with RHDV2, it affects all ages of rabbits, which was not the case for RHDV1. RHDV2 has been seen in kits under 11 weeks of age, which not the case for RHDV1, and also adults. And it appears to be a very stable virus in the environment, and it's been found to be viable in the environment for up to 3 months. The transmission of the virus is by objects, direct contact with sick animals, and blood-feeding insects. So objects, hay, your shoes, clothing, anything like that. So again, unless you have very high biosecurity measures in place, or use the vaccine, your rabbits are at risk of getting the virus because you just never know where it's going to pop up next. The incubation period typically ranges from 1 to 3 days, and often death occurs within 3 days of you seeing those symptoms of the disease. It is an inflammation of the liver known as hepatitis, and it can lead to bleeding problems and then inflammation throughout the body, and then ultimately that death. The virus itself replicates in the liver, spleen, and white blood cells, and then goes on to affect the entire body, again with that inflammation. And then until recently, foreign vaccines were the only option for intervention to RHDV2. The imported vaccines were only allowed in states once the state had an outbreak of RHDV2. Those vaccines from Europe were not USDA evaluated or approved. And those vaccines were modified live vaccine, or not modified live, my apologies. Live virus taken from infected rabbits and killed. So a killed virus vaccine. And then once our vaccine came around, the USDA has now stopped allowing the import of those European vaccines. Some individuals still have the permit to get the European license, but once that permit is expired, they will not be renewed. So who is Medgene Labs as a company? The company itself was founded in 2011, and then we transitioned to veterinary vaccines in 2014. When we first started as a company, we were more along the diagnostic assay side, but with research from South Dakota State University and partnerships with Kansas State University, we started working on vaccines for animals, and then we just continue to do that, and that is what our focus is now. In 2018, we obtained our U.S. Veterinary Biologics Manufacturing Establishment license. So we are a fully licensed vaccine manufacturer through the USDA. And then our goal as a company is to bring innovative technology to animal health industry through our vaccine platform. And again, that is using a Baclovirus expression system to target specific proteins on viruses that will help prevent diseases. So this provides a unique look into vaccines for minor species that may not fit other companies' goals for making vaccines for certain industries. So we have a vaccine for white-tailed deer, a very small industry, but because of the vaccine platform that we use, it's easy for us to make smaller batches of vaccine basically and meet the demands of that smaller industry versus the swine industry that is very large, and you can produce many millions of vaccines for swine. We also have swine vaccines and cattle vaccines, but again, those are targeted vaccines that we like to work with herds versus the entire industry as a whole. With RHDV2, a little different because the virus is pretty stable, as in it doesn't mutate very fast. We can look at RHDV2, create an overall vaccine for RHDV2 that would be useful for the entire rabbit industry. Again, if we start to see maybe a new variant, a new strain of RHD, then we could rapidly respond and produce a new vaccine against that target. So again, emerging diseases and then foreign animal diseases. And technically RHDV is still considered a foreign animal disease. We're dedicated to improving animal health with responsive services for animal owners and their veterinarians. So we like to build a relationship with our customers, veterinarians, so that we can have that feedback and understanding of if the vaccine is working Having a relationship with customers and veterinarians, we can understand if the diseases in the field are starting to change, or if, maybe an entirely different virus will start to affect rabbits, and we can work with rabbit veterinarians, rabbit owners to get a vaccine against that. So kind of a cyclical process that we don't just want to give you a vaccine and then set you on your way. We want to build a relationship and ensure that our vaccines really are working and keep meeting the needs of the industry. In September of last year, we got our prescription platform license for swine. And again, what that means is we can use our platform production system to rapidly make different vaccines for swine. So the platform system can make a rota vaccine, but then we can easily switch it to make an influenza vaccine. So that's what that means. Again, easily responding to emerging and mutating viruses. And then, as many of you know, in September, we were also given emergency use authorization for our RHDV2 vaccine by the USDA. And then, whoops, sorry about that. Some differences between our vaccine and the European vaccines would be that the authorization for ours in the state, they don't have to have an outbreak of RHDV2 to be allowed to use our vaccine. As long as the state veterinarian and state health officials approve the vaccine for use in their state, the vaccine can be used. There does not have to be RHDV2 within that state. I'm going to look at the chat to see if there was any questions. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions related to the virus itself, so I'll just continue on with our vaccine.
Oh, Ashley, we do have one question.
Okay. Yeah,
so someone is asking if your vax contains the live virus.
Sure. It does not. So again, the vaccine technology that we use, we never have to have the live virus. What we do is we use genetic sequencing to look at just a small fragment of the entire virus genome. And again, we are targeting just a specific protein on the RHDV2 virus. And then the sequence of that protein can be used to put into a Baclovirus, which is an insect cell. And then that newly designed Baclovirus then is used to infect insect cells. And those insect cells then create the protein that was on the RHDV2 virus. So then that protein is what goes into the vaccine. And then the rabbit will make an antibody against that specific protein. And if the rabbit sees RHDV2, gets infected with RHDV2 in real life, its body will automatically see that outer protein on the RHDV2 virus and attack that right away. So then it neutralizes the virus before it has a chance to cause disease. So I hope that answered that.
Fascinating. Thank you for that response. I actually have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So this means you don't need to actually make this vaccine. You don't need to have infected rabbits to make the vaccine the way that the European ones do.
Yeah, not at all. No, we don't ever need to have the live virus for our vaccine manufacturing. We can just use, there's databases that for some of these more common viruses, they house the genetic sequence, and we can easily use that as how we develop the vaccines.
Thank you.
All right, some of these questions are getting maybe off topic, or I might be able to answer them in later slides. So I might just go on. Okay, I'm just gonna I'll just go on.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think most of these are related to dosing and distribution,
Yes.
which I think you'll probably get to.
Yes, yep. All right, so our RHDV2 killed Baclovirus vector vaccine. The USDA gave emergency use authorization after we had a lot of data for the vaccine. Some people think that there's nothing known about if the vaccine works, but that's not true. We actually did perform efficacy studies, which means we used the vaccine in a portion of some rabbits. Another portion of rabbits got a placebo vaccine, and then all of them were exposed to RHDV2. And then you monitor clinical signs, death, and then you compare the vaccinated rabbits to placebo vaccinated rabbits to see if your vaccine really worked. And ours did. I will be discussing that in a couple slides. And then we also had initial safety study data. The USDA would not allow us to distribute the vaccine without at least some level of safety known for the vaccine. So we had to do, I believe it was a little over 100 rabbits, and submit all of that data to the USDA before they would allow the emergency use. So we did get a few things complete before this vaccine ever made it to market. In general, the requirements that the USDA or CVB, which is Center for Veterinary Biologics, their requirements for a fully licensed veterinary vaccine are pure, safe, potent, and efficacious. So as far as pure, what that means is your vaccine is free of exogenous agents and contaminants. So basically, you want to make sure there's nothing else in your vaccine besides what you say is in your vaccine. And we have that complete. We've done all of the testing on our vaccine components to know that only the protein to RHDV2 that we want is going in there, along with the specific adjuvant that is compatible with rabbits. So we know that our vaccine is pure. The next step is safety. So you need to ensure that the vaccine is safe to use in the target species. And you'll see that that overall process is loading because we are not fully complete with the extensive safety studies that the USDA requires for full license. So typically what they like to see for a fully licensed product is 600 animals across 3 different geographical locations in the US. So when we got emergency use, we only had 1/3 of that done. So we are continuing to work on the safety aspect of that. And then potent means that you test each batch of vaccine that you make, and each batch has to generate the same response. So our company has developed a certain assay that determines that, yes, this batch of vaccine is just as good as the last batch of vaccine. That process is loading. To get a potency assay validated by the USDA is a very lengthy process. And that is needed for the full license. So that's part of why we don't have a full license for the vaccine, because we're still working on our potency assay. And then efficacious, as I had mentioned, it proves that your vaccine is protective against disease, and we do have that complete. So as far as the efficacy study design, sorry, I have to move. I can't see some of my slides. So we had 40 New Zealand white rabbits enrolled in the study, and this was a study performed at Colorado State University. So controlled study, that's what the USDA likes to see, very controlled studies, limiting outside effects. So we had healthy, mixed sex, and approximately 1 pound or 4 weeks of age. That's what we targeted for beginning the vaccine. And then 20 of those rabbits received our RHDV2 vaccine and 20 received the placebo vaccine. And when you do these studies, the people that are monitoring the rabbits do not know which vaccine the rabbit got. So those are called blind studies, where the people actually performing the studies don't know which animal got what. And that's just to maintain that the study is true and nothing is rigged, basically. So again, our vaccine is a killed Baclovirus vector containing a recombinant RHDV2 protein. The vaccine is given subcutaneously or just under the skin. It's a 0.5 ml per dose vaccine, and there's 2 doses given 21 days apart. The challenge, we received a liver homogenate from RHDV2 infected rabbits from the USDA themselves, and then that was given to all of the rabbits 2 weeks after their second dose of vaccine, and that was a 1 ml oral administration per animal. So again, the study days are 0, which is the first day of vaccination, and then day 21. So all of the rabbits received their doses on those 2 days. And then 2 weeks after that second dose is when they got challenged with RHDV2. And then throughout the course of the study and then beyond the challenge, so 10 days beyond the challenge, the animal care team monitors the rabbits for general health, morbidity, which means treatments if the animals are sick and have to be treated, mortality, clinical signs, and then if an animal died, a necropsy was performed to confirm why they died. And then the outcomes that we evaluated, the primary one obviously is mortality, because RHDV2 causes mortality. And then secondary outcomes were clinical signs, and we did do some liver PCRs to determine the level of RHDV2 infection. So the results of the study for the primary outcome being that mortality rate that I mentioned, 69% mortality in the placebo vaccinated animals. So those that were vaccinated with basically nothing in the vaccine, almost 70% of those rabbits died. Whereas we had 0 rabbits that got our vaccine die after challenge. With statistics on there, it was a p-value of 0.0017, which is very statistically significant. And then if we look at the secondary outcomes and we list liver PCR, CT values here, the lower the CT value, the higher the virus load, because CT means cycle threshold. So the assay has to cycle so many times to get it to detect the virus. This might be going too far into science, but so if there's a lower number like this 15.8 for the placebo rabbits, that means there's more virus in them than these vaccinated rabbits. And typically, well, you'll see the negative control here is in the 30s. And that's usually when CT values hit 30 and above, it means they're basically negative for that virus. So with this data that was evaluated by the USDA, they approved our vaccine as efficacious. So we know it protects against RHDV2. I know there's probably a lot of questions about this, so I will go through this and then I'll probably stop and look at some of the questions. So the 21-day booster, when you are licensing a vaccine, you have to determine a set booster schedule. We can't put a range on our label. If we did, we would have to do a challenge study at each of those days that we would say the booster can be administered. So we just have to pick a day, and that's what goes on our label. So 3 weeks after the first dose, the rabbit gets a second dose. There are many different variations of 2-dose products. So I know of ones that are, the booster comes 2 weeks or 14 days after initial dose. There's some that are 4 weeks, 5 weeks. I mean, there's a variation. Our company likes the 3 weeks. All of our products have second dose at 21 days. But as you can see, you can give that second dose at a different time than exactly 21 days. You do not want to give it before 2 weeks post initial vaccination, because your body, if you see this graph, your body's still responding to that first dose of vaccine. So you don't give a booster during this time because it would not boost anything. Your body's still making the first immune response. But anytime after those 2 weeks, you could give the booster up to a certain point. If you get far out into this 6, 7, 8 weeks, you are running into the potential that the vaccine may not work. The booster may not actually boost the response. But as a company, we don't have any data to show that you could give the vaccine 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and it would still booster the same way. But in general, that is how basic immunology works. I hope that explains that well enough. The other thing to think about with RHDV2 is you're trying to protect your rabbits as soon as possible. So there's really no reason to be waiting longer than what our label indicates, which is 21 days, 3 weeks apart, because you will not get immunity in your rabbits for at least a week or two after that second dose of vaccine. So you don't want to be waiting, because that just means that your rabbit isn't having immunity until later and later and later. So I will look at the chat now.
Yeah, we do have several questions. I think you probably answered a few of them with this slide.
Sure. Okay.
Does Medgene anticipate being able to go to a single dose vaccine instead of 2 is one question that has come up.
Right. It's certainly a question we get across the board in all species, I'll tell you that. And we try our hardest to, use different adjuvants to see if we can get a 1-dose vaccine. In some cases it works. Unfortunately, with rabbits and their sensitivity to different adjuvants, we have to be careful with that. So you're trying to balance safety with not having to give as many doses. So that's something that we consider as a company as well. But it's something that we're looking into. I would not say that is something feasible in the next few years, but it's always something that we're trying to work towards across the board with all of our vaccines.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm not sure if you're going to get to this in the next slide, but will booster doses be required?
Yes. Right now we are planning duration of immunity studies. So basically those studies will look at what the best booster schedule is. For a fully licensed vaccine, you have to show 6 months duration of immunity. So your vaccine, those first 2 doses of your vaccine have to be good enough to get to 6 months before you give another booster. So 6 months would be the shortest time frame. We will also be looking at a year, but we anticipate that it will at least be a yearly booster needed. And that's very common for subunit vaccines, which is basically what ours is, because again, you're balancing effectiveness with safety. Subunit vaccines are some of the safest out there. When you're thinking about lifelong immunity vaccines, those are modified live, and those can pose a lot of safety risks. So we balance efficacy with safety and side on the caution of we'd rather have it be safe.
Okay. I do have a couple questions that have come through that are related to your efficacy study.
Okay.
So a couple questions about side effects. I'm not sure if you're planning to discuss potential side effects. If so, we can just kind of hold that for.
Yeah, so that I'll touch base on those in the safety part of the talk.
Okay. Okay, so there was another question, which was, do you know whether the vaccinated and challenged rabbits shed virus from the challenge?
We did not look into that. So besides having the liver PCR data, which does show that the virus was replicating, we did not do viral shedding, and we have not looked into that. So we have no data to know.
There was another question asking about the secondary endpoints, where noting that the PCR CT for vaccinated rabbits was 27, so which is less than 30. So does this imply that these rabbits had some symptoms but just did not die?
Not necessarily symptoms. So the PCR means that virus was detected, and obviously the animals were infected with virus. So the virus has to infect you, but the body was able to shut it down before it caused severe clinical signs or death. So it was not surprising to see, PCR levels that detected virus even in the vaccinated animals. That's not uncommon. It's very, what's the word? It's probably not feasible to think that your vaccine could completely shut down the virus before you will see some replication in the body. The immune response takes a little bit of time to get revved up, but it definitely shuts it down before anything further.
One additional question was just wondering if you have any published, either peer-reviewed or in preprint for your efficacy, and I assume you're going to talk about safety studies as well. I would sure be interested in reading that too.
Yep. So what we have right now is available on our website, and it's really just a summary of the studies that we've done. To do fully published papers and whatnot, the USDA has to approve all of those. And right now, what is on our website is what has been approved for us to share with everyone.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So we are sharing what the USDA has approved us to share.
Okay. We have a question. What is the adjuvant that is used?
We use aluminum hydroxide.
Someone else has asked if a bunny gets RHDV2, will the vaccine help recuperate? So I'm not sure what the question is asking. If maybe you give the vaccine following infection.
So basically what the question is, my assumption is, if RHDV2 starts hitting your herd and you have an outbreak of RHDV2, can you then vaccinate? You certainly can. Is it likely too late for the vaccine to work? Probably. We don't have any data to know if the vaccine could save already infected rabbits, but scientifically, it's probably not likely, especially the way that RHDV2 works and how fast it basically kills the animal. There's not a lot of time from the time that you would think that you might have an outbreak to getting a vaccine, getting it on board. You usually don't have a lot of time. In the beginning, when we were first doing some of the initial studies with our vaccine, we had some farms in California reach out to us that had outbreaks, asking if they could use vaccine. They knew we were doing some research in it. So we actually started the process with the USDA to see if we could do something emergency wise to get them a few doses of vaccine. And before we could even get approval from the USDA, they had called back and said, unfortunately, RHDV2 has decimated our herd. We can't vaccinate anymore. So basically RHDV2 went so fast through their herd that vaccine intervention was not possible.
Okay, thank you. I think that's probably, unless I missed any, I think the rest of the questions are related to safety and costs, I guess you could say risk benefit comment,
Sure.
thoughts. And then there were a couple I missed that are about transmission of the virus. So I can hold those till the end since we're not really in that section right now. And
Perfect.
okay.
All right. So as far as safety of the vaccine and those requirements for what a field safety study looks like with the USDA. So again, that's 3 distinct geographical locations in the US, and they typically like at least 600 animals. A third of those animals have to be at the youngest age for a label claim, and we got that at 4 weeks of age. So our vaccine can be used in 4 weeks old rabbits, 4-week-old rabbits. And then at those different sites, you need to have an adequate number of animals at each of the sites and mixed sex. So you can't have 10 rabbits at one farm and 360 at another, sort of thing. They like to have about the same amount of animals at each location. So when we initially had our conversations with the USDA, because of rabbits being maybe a minor species, not like swine and cattle, we said that we would like to do just 300 rabbits. So about 130 rabbits per site. You do always put an overage because of death loss for normal husbandry things. So we had 130 rabbits per site, mixed sex and mixed ages, again, with at least a third of all of the animals at 4 weeks of age, and then all the way up to older animals. Our first safety site, which was completed and data reviewed by the USDA before we were allowed that emergency use authorization, the things that were noted for adverse reactions, that's what AE stands for. There were a couple out of 100 of the rabbits that those vaccinated rabbits had slight injection site swellings following vaccination. So about 2 rabbits out of 100. And then that injection site swelling resolved within 48 hours. To go into a little bit more detail about the safety studies. So when you perform the safety study, each animal has to be physically palpated at the injection site to understand if there's anything, a nodule, swelling, anything like that at the injection site prior to vaccination. If they have a pre-existing bump, lump, what have you, they cannot be allowed in the study. If they are sick, diarrhea, those sort of things, snotty nose, they are not allowed to be in the study. So these are healthy, perfectly healthy animals that get enrolled in these safety studies. So then once you vaccinate those animals, they're physically palpated the day after vaccination and then visually monitored every day until the second vaccination, where palpation happens again to understand if there was still any swelling, any nodules from that first vaccination. And then the day after second vaccination, palpations again. If they do find swelling, nodules, bumps, what have you, they have to physically palpate the animals until that resolves, because you want to know how long that resolution takes. And that's how we knew that they were resolved within 48 hours, 2 days. And again, that safety study data helped give us the emergency use authorization, which was September 16th from the USDA. Now we have those 2 other sites, site 2 and 3, and the USDA has that data now. We are completely done with those. And they've actually asked us to get a little more information, basically from the rabbit industry, from veterinarians that deal a lot with rabbits, to understand specific concerns that rabbit owners may have. The USDA doesn't have a lot of experience with rabbit vaccines, so they really want to know what precautions should basically go on the label. It appears that rabbits are easily stressed, and vaccination itself, handling itself, can stress animals and cause them to maybe go off feed for a few days, not feel good for a few days. And when those are just normal things that happen when an animal is stressed, people can see that as, well, the vaccine caused this and it's causing bad reactions. That's what the USDA is trying to balance, just a stress response versus vaccine related. And again, in the safety studies that we've done, we didn't really see those stressing situations. So just trying to understand what will be best, so that when rabbit owners use this vaccine, they know what to expect. Because of that, the USDA has requested that we do more animals to get a little more data under our belt, especially with this being the only rabbit vaccine that will be licensed through the USDA. They just want to be comfortable and know exactly what to expect and make sure that the product is very safe and rabbit owners don't have to worry. So we are starting discussions about getting those extra animals, and we will get that going as soon as we can. We believe by March we should be able to start rolling with the extra animals, and then that just needs to be complete before we get our fully licensed vaccine. That doesn't change us being allowed to distribute the vaccine right now. It just will delay the ultimate timeline of us getting a fully licensed vaccine. Did you want to go over some of the safety concerns now then?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So one person had a general concern, pointing out that, you know, the safety is still listed as loading from your initial screen. So how can owners determine, you know, which is the greatest risk, the vaccine effects versus protecting against the virus? If you have any additional comments on that.
Yep. So from the data we have, and ultimately how our vaccine is made and the technology behind it, again, it is one of the safest types of vaccines you can possibly use. And again, if the USDA felt like it was more of a risk to use the vaccine than your animal to get RHDV2, they would not have allowed the vaccine to be distributed. Again, most common thing that had been noted was injection site swelling for a few days that resolved. Beyond that, nothing overtly concerning. Obviously, having your rabbit get RHDV2 would be much more concerning because there is a high possibility that they will die from RHDV2. And we don't have any concerns of the vaccine causing death in a healthy animal.
Yeah. Did you observe or did you check for side effects among the placebo groups as well, or did the safety study not involve any placebo injections?
So through the USDA, for safety studies, you don't have placebos. They actually don't allow that. But what we did do at one of the farms was so it was the 4 weeks of age kits. We had some that the farm team monitored on a daily basis along with the vaccinated animals. Those non-vaccinated animals didn't get any sort of vaccine, but they were monitored in the same way. And basically that was trying to understand health issues over the course of a rabbit's life. So we know that young rabbits can have a hard time with certain diseases, specifically bacterial diseases. And at that farm, it's a good thing that we did that because they had an outbreak of a bacterial infection that killed the same proportion of unvaccinated kits as it did vaccinated kits. But then when we do necropsies on those vaccinated animals that might die during a field safety study, you confirm what caused the death. And you understand that it was a bacterial infection and had nothing to do with the vaccine. So with the rabbits, we were able to evaluate that a little bit better, but no, we don't have placebo vaccinated animals in the safety study.
Someone has, because you mentioned that USDA has asked for additional data from vets and breeders and such. Someone commented that their vet has ordered hundreds of doses. Have you reached out to vets such as those for this additional data?
So we started with the vets that did our field safety studies. So when you do a field safety study, you work with veterinarians that manage basically that herd of animals. So we worked with them because they really are some of the experts in the rabbit industry, health-wise at least. So we have letters from them explaining disease concerns, stress concerns for rabbits, what can happen when rabbits get stressed. So from a veterinary basis, those are 3 of the vets that we had make statements for us to go to the USDA. If the USDA would like additional information, we will definitely reach out to those maybe smaller herd health vets that deal with a lot of rabbits to get some insight from them. But at this point, we just targeted the bigger, more well-known veterinarians, I guess you can say.
So sort of related, are there plans for, I know with human clinical trials, which is what I'm more familiar with, there's, the phase 4s trials that happen after something is on the market. Are there plans for additional monitoring and, analysis after this becomes more widely used?
Yeah, so actually same concept happens with veterinary vaccines, and it's called pharmacovigilance. So what that is, it's a monitoring system where either a veterinarian or animal owner can report an event, adverse reaction that may be involved with vaccine use. So if you have your animal vaccinated and something happens to them that you think, well, this could be vaccine related, that can be reported to us. And then we have to go through an investigation process to understand, was it vaccine related or was it something else? And all of that information gets submitted to the USDA. So yes, it is a monitoring system after the vaccine is licensed. Actually, we currently do it as well because of the vaccine's distribution right now. So we have, I think right now, there have been 19 reports that we have submitted to the USDA through our pharmacovigilance monitoring. And that has been since we started distributing distribution in October of 2021. So 19 reports in that time.
Are you allowed to comment on what those reports were, or if they were turned out to be that you deemed related to the vaccine versus not, or anything like that?
Right. So the majority of them were probably minor. So injection site swelling, they went off feed for a few days, maybe had a little diarrhea, and those are common things that can happen after vaccination. If anyone, has gotten the COVID vaccine and you might not feel that great after you get a vaccine, that's actually your body's immune response happening. When your immune response revs up to respond to something like a vaccine, it can make you feel a little lethargic. Maybe you don't want to eat for a little bit. It kind of just makes you feel a little off because your body is making an immune response. So those are maybe sort of things that are good to see. In other cases, there were some deaths reported, but nothing that has been deemed vaccine related. Between bacterial infections and things like that, vaccinating unhealthy animals that probably shouldn't have got vaccinated in the first place. So things like that. We haven't had any deaths that I'm aware of that were clearly vaccine related. So
we have a couple of participants that have pointed out, you mentioned diarrhea, that diarrhea and, gastro issues in general are concerning for rabbits. Which is true. So I don't know that we would call that minor necessarily, I guess is what the participants are saying.
Sure. Okay. I guess within the reactions that have been reported with diarrhea being, something they observed, it cleared up and didn't cause any other long-term or other issues.
Okay.
The veterinarian was able to resolve the issues and get the animal back to normal health.
Okay.
If your animal is known to have some of those stress behaviors, maybe get your vet's opinion on what the best vaccination schedule is, and if there's anything you can do to better prepare your rabbits, probiotics, things like that, possibly. I know some of the veterinarians that have more knowledge with rabbits understand what's best to do to help your rabbits be prepared for vaccination and then keep healthy after vaccination. So I would work with your veterinarian to establish the best vaccination protocol for your situation if you know your rabbits are easily stressed and might have some intestinal issues.
Yeah, sure. So that actually sort of leads a nice segue into a couple other questions, which are asking about, I guess I could group these as the counterindications. So are there any counterindications for contraindications for this vaccine? Someone has specifically asked about giving the vaccine the same day as a rabbit being neutered. Someone else is asking if their rabbit has a history of dental abscesses, would it be okay to give the vaccine?
As far as procedures like neutering, things like that, there should be no reason that you could not get them vaccinated at the same time. Again, probably best to work with your veterinarian so that they can have an opinion on if that's a good time to use the vaccine. Medgene as a company is not an expert in rabbits. So we really do rely on you guys having a good relationship with your veterinarians and establishing what they see fit for your animal. But science-wise and vaccine-wise, there would be no reason you could not have them vaccinated on the same day they would get neutered. I don't know if vaccine would cause any issues with dental diseases, but again, if that is a condition that is caused by stress, then potentially, because again, the whole act of vaccinating can be stressful for certain animals. So again, I would work with your veterinarians to establish the best vaccination protocol, especially if your rabbits are predisposed to certain conditions.
All right, thank you. Can you, someone has asked you to clarify how you can determine if a death is due to the vaccine versus something else?
Yeah, so in the case of the reported deaths, we ask them to have a necropsy performed. So why can't I think? A necropsy is when a veterinarian or pathologist evaluates the entire animal as a whole and looks at all of their body systems to understand why they died. So we have been able to pinpoint other things in the rabbit that caused the death and not the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. We have had somebody point out that at their rescue, they have over 70 rabbits that have been vaccinated with no adverse reactions. I can comment that at our rescue, we've had 21 foster and sanctuary and volunteer-owned rabbits that are fully vaccinated, ranging from 8 months old to almost 14 months. And we had several that were over 10 years. They had a number of health conditions among them, and none showed any adverse reactions to the vaccine. So just throwing that out there.
Yep, and I would like to point out, as of last week, we were just over 35,000 doses of the vaccine distributed. So having 19 reports out of over 35,000 is pretty good for safety.
Yeah, based on my knowledge of human studies, yes, that sounds like a small number.
Yes.
So, oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Our rabbits range up to 13 years and 9 months, so 14 years, not okay. Months. I apologize. So quite a range of rabbits, a range of ages at our rescue. So I think we have, is there a recorded total deaths from the vaccine? Or is it 0?
To my knowledge, and I am personally involved with the pharmacovigilance monitoring, I believe there are none confirmed to be deaths from vaccination.
Okay. We have someone else asking, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just a note, when we have the entire field safety study done, so the 600 animals that the USDA is now requiring us to do, and they have reviewed that data and they approve it for a full license, all of that information. So if we do have confirmed deaths from vaccination, every little adverse reaction that is reported during that study, that information will go on the USDA website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, are you going to get into any like distribution updates? Someone is asking about updates on shelf life studies.
Yep. So I think at this point, it might be best for me to continue with some slides, because I think I'll start answering some of those other questions. So
okay, sounds good.
So as far as emergency use authorization and what that means for us, again, that authorization was given after the USDA was approving our data and had confidence to allow widespread distribution and use. USDA is very particular about the data that they need to have before they are confident in a vaccine. So they have great confidence that the vaccine is not going to cause any undue harm. So good thing to note there. We do have to work through state animal health officials, state veterinarians to get the vaccine approved in each state. And then the vaccine can be used in that state. So right now we have 44 states that we can sell the vaccine in, and Washington, D.C. It has its own approval in there. So we have all of that. There are some states that have not decided to allow use in their state. At this point, we've provided them with everything we can, everything they've asked, and some of them just want to wait until it's fully licensed. That is their decision. We, again, have discussed this with them many times. The USDA has sent out information to certain state vets to try to get them at a better confidence level, and there's some that just have not approved it yet. The conditions for each state can vary. So in some states, they want to approve each veterinarian on a case-by-case basis. So you're actually getting an approval for each vet clinic, veterinarian sort of thing. Whereas other states have just given us a blanket approval that, yes, you can sell to licensed veterinarians in this state. So each state can have their own conditions, and we have to follow those. Right now, we must sell to licensed veterinarians, and that is USDA and state regulations because of the emergency use authorization part of this. They want licensed veterinarians to be involved because the vaccine isn't fully approved. And then again, as I had mentioned, the vaccine has been approved for use in states with no RHDV2 cases. RHDV2 does not have to be in your state for you to use the vaccine, as long as your state veterinarian has approved its use in your state. We've also been able to determine that our vaccine does not affect the PCR testing that's used to confirm RHDV2 deaths. So that shouldn't be a concern that a rabbit could get mixed up with an RHDV2 positive death if they've been vaccinated. We've proven that our vaccine does not cause the PCR test to be positive. So some states had a concern about that, but we were able to show that that is not the case. For the European vaccines, that's kind of why they were limited to states that had outbreaks, because they could not determine vaccinated versus infected animals. So our current inventory and logistics of how we distribute the vaccine. Right now, what we have are 10-dose vials. So there are 10 doses within one vial. Right now, our inventory has an expiration date of September of 2023. And where the expiration date comes from is we get 2 years from the manufacture date. And then those expire and should not be used anymore. But we are continuously making new inventory to keep that fresh and make sure that there is no concern that there will be a shortage of vaccine. The vaccine is refrigerated. It should not be frozen. If it is rendered useless, basically. Aluminum hydroxide cannot be frozen. If it is frozen, it does not work anymore. So that is where refrigeration versus freezing comes in. A question we get a lot because of the fact that these are 10-dose multi-vials is, once you puncture that vial, do you have to use it within a certain time frame? And there is some debate on this because the USDA requires all veterinary biologics to have a statement on the label that is basically use entire contents once first opened. And that is the statement that they give. It doesn't give a time frame. It's just use it once it's first opened. And this is a sterility concern. It has nothing to do with stability of the product. So again, when I mentioned that pure aspect of your vaccine, you have to prove that only what you say is in the vaccine is in your vaccine. Once you puncture that vial, you could be introducing things into the vial that aren't supposed to be there. So we can't tell you to keep using the vial once you've punctured it. But the contents are stable. It's not like a reaction happens once it's opened and you have to use it within 2 hours or the vaccine doesn't work anymore. It's just that concern of sterility. Did you accidentally draw in some bacteria into the vaccine when you were drawing out a dose? But we do have thimerosal and gentamicin in our vaccine to help reduce the risk of any contamination should someone continue to use a vial after they first opened it. But stability wise, the vaccine is stable until that expiration date, as long as it's kept properly refrigerated. Logistics of shipping. We ship Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and we use FedEx overnight delivery. More recently, we've been able to establish some standard shipping rates based on state. If your veterinarian is wondering about that, they can let us know and we'll get them proper shipping rates for the state you're located in. And to be eligible for a shipment to be shipped that same week, we have to have orders received by 1 p.m. on Tuesdays. And again, we can only sell to licensed veterinarians. So either a licensed veterinarian or their clinic staff can call us to place an order. And I have our customer service line there for veterinarians to reach out to order the product. Any other logistics questions before I go on, or should I just go on and finish up?
I think we can just finish up. I posted a link to your website that lists the states that are currently approved.
Perfect. Okay. So as far as our licensing timeline, because again, we get lots of questions about that. We had a more aggressive timeline a few months ago, but getting some information back from the USDA and them wanting some additional rabbits for safety. And then trying to get our duration of immunity study, which is a 6-month-long study, set up has taken longer than we would have liked. Finding a location to perform that study and the logistics of how that study works has been more cumbersome than we originally realized. So what we have left, of course, is getting all of the 600 rabbits done for the field safety, that 6-month duration of immunity study, and then the potency assay validation that I had mentioned in the very beginning, which is a tedious and lengthy process. The assay itself, very, very specific to RHDV2 and the components of our vaccine. Again, it's a assay that will ensure that from batch to batch, our vaccine is standardized and will always work the exact same way. It's a way for the USDA to ensure companies are making products that won't fail in the field. So they don't want us to make a batch of RHDV2 vaccine that won't protect the rabbits against RHDV2. So we always have to have a certain level of the RHDV2 protein within our vaccine to ensure that it actually will protect the rabbits. So that's what that potency assay means. So right now, our anticipated full licensure date is probably in 2023. At that time, we would be able to open up selling the vaccine to a larger audience, probably working with some distribution companies and things like that to get the vaccine more readily available. but we still encourage owners to build relationships with their veterinarian for that optimum animal health. Again, with rabbits being a little more sensitive, maybe being easier to stress, working with a veterinarian that understands not only, the vaccine side of things, but also animals in general. I think that's a much better situation than ultimately taking it into your own hands and maybe having the vaccine not work very well or having some adverse reactions that may not have happened if you were working with a veterinarian. So always something to keep in mind, that veterinarians are out there to help keep your animals as healthy as possible, and they want the best interest of the animal. So continue to work with them as best as you can, even when the vaccine is fully licensed. Some additional research that we are doing, there is question about our vaccine being used as a booster to the European vaccines. My apologies, my dog is now barking. Anyways, we are trying to collect the data to understand if our vaccine works as a booster to some of those already vaccinated animals. Because the European vaccines are completely different than our vaccine, our recommendation right now is to just use our vaccine as the 2-dose regimen per label instructions, and then the yearly or 6-month boosters as our duration of immunity study determines. So safest bet is start with 2 doses of ours, even if they've been previously vaccinated. But we are trying to gather data to understand if 1 dose of ours is enough if your rabbit has already been vaccinated with the European vaccine. And then another question we get quite often is the vaccine safe to use in pregnant animals? To get a safe in pregnant claim on our label through the USDA, those are very extensive studies that you have to do. And as a company, we do not plan on doing that. But over the course of the use of the vaccine, we're obviously gathering information about people using it in pregnant animals. Some of the animals in our safety studies were actually pregnant at the time of the vaccine being used, unbeknownst to us. So we did not see any concerning things with having the vaccine being used in those pregnant animals, pregnant and nursing. I mean, some of them had kits on them when we used them for the safety study. Again, no concerns that we saw within the animals that have been vaccinated and been pregnant, but we cannot claim that because we do not have the extensive studies done. So. And finally, acknowledgements. Colorado State University was used for the challenge efficacy study. So acknowledging them, and obviously we wouldn't be where we are with the vaccine if we didn't have their assistance. Dr. Angela at CSU developed the challenge model in rabbits at CSU. And so their expertise was amazing. And then also Dr. Amanda Jones, a veterinarian down in Texas that has been exceptionally great to work with and of great help for us. She raises her own rabbits and does a lot of work with rabbits in her veterinary practice. So having her expertise has been amazing, and we continue to work with her through the pharmacovigilance monitoring, and then with the additional studies that we will be doing for field safety, we'll be working with Dr. Jones. So with that, we'll look into more of those questions then.
Great, thank you. So we do have a number of participants that signed up from Canada. And so there is a question that it sounds like 2023 would be the earliest that this vaccine would be available in Canada. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. So there are ways that Canadian regulatory bodies can reach out to us and USDA and work together to basically get the same emergency use authorization for an imported vaccine. Very similar to how individuals worked with those European companies to get the USDA to allow their usage in the United States until our vaccine was available. So similar situation. To have Medgene start the conversation with Canadian regulatory bodies, I don't believe that's how the regulatory process works. So it would be something that Canada will have to reach out to the USDA, and I mean, that would probably be the best bet, is to start the conversation with the USDA about importing the vaccine. So it is feasible for Canada to get it before we are fully licensed. Even once we have a fully licensed product, there are still things that need to happen with the Canadian regulatory body in order for the vaccine to be used there. So probably better to get that moving sooner rather than later, but it is possible to get it before a full license.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. We have a couple comments related to cost. Not sure if you're allowed to share the cost of the 10-dose vials. I'm sure that veterinary charges probably vary by vet, by doctor.
Yes. So that is one of the reasons that we have not been publicly sharing the price, because veterinarians have to have other costs. They have the vaccine shipped to them, so they're paying shipping fees. They're paying storage fees for when the vaccine has to be stored in their facilities. All of those things that go into obtaining a vaccine, and then, making sure that it's administered properly and all of that. So they are allowed to put whatever price on the vaccine they see fit. From my understanding of the European vaccines, the price of our vaccine is very similar to that. So I guess I would just say work with your veterinarian to try to work out a price, especially if you have large herds that you have to vaccinate. There are veterinarians I know that have gotten the RHDV2 vaccine for herds versus just 1 or 2 rabbits, and have been very reasonable about pricing for that, instead of charging, per animal clinic fees. They're charging just like a farm visit fee, like you would for cattle or something like that. So again, developing those relationships with veterinarians really is the best thing, so that, you're not only working with them to have the best health for your animal, but, you get the best price too, basically. So.
Thank you. I think that was all of the questions about logistics. There were a couple questions that came in that I missed about the virus itself. Should be quick answers. So one person was asking about whether the virus can be transmitted, in a hay delivery,
Right.
through shipments of hay. That's a big concern. My understanding is yes. So I don't know if you have just a couple minutes to talk about maybe some biosafety measures that can be taken.
So as the vaccine manufacturing company, we don't know necessarily about hay distribution and feed companies and what they're doing to minimize risk. So maybe biosecurity in general would be very similar to what individuals were doing to cut down on COVID transmission. So before you handle your rabbits, just make sure that you have maybe washed your hands if you've been around other animals. If you've been to areas that have RHDV2, washing anything, cleaning anything before it comes into contact with your rabbits. Those sort of biosecurity things. As far as feed and hay, it is definitely possible for viruses to be transmitted that way. We've seen that in the swine industry where viruses have gotten over from China basically because of feed. So you really never know. And that's where vaccines are so important because they can mitigate the risk of your animal succumbing to a disease because they're going to prevent the disease from taking over in the rabbit. So I think that's probably the best I can answer for that.
I can offer a bit of clarification just based on my own training. I don't know a lot about lagomyces, but I know that they're part of the Calcaviridae family, and I don't think they can be killed by your average Lysol wipe. So it requires a bit more to disinfect. And it is a very hardy virus, as you mentioned, so it can survive even freezing. So yes, it has been known to be transmitted on fomites, including hay. So I believe I'll let Karen chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 3 months is the recommended quarantine period for feed. And we do have a list of companies that we know have info on their websites and say they follow that recommendation. Karen is president of Safe Haven Rabbit Rescue. I neglected to introduce her before, but Karen, if you have any extra detail there.
Yes, hi. And I saw a couple of the chats too, like we know companies are saying, and it was Small Pet Select, Oxbow, and Rabbit Hole Hay that have right on their website that they are storing their hay a minimum of 3 months. And from what I know about the hay, it's usually much older than that before it ever leaves their place to be shipped to rabbit owners. So I would just, check your source of hay. If you're buying bales of hay, I would not buy in known locations where RHD has been. And if you do buy bales of hay, let it sit in your barn for 6 months. And again, this is the point of getting your rabbits vaccinated. And I think Ashley was, very great in her conversations with that. The whole purpose of getting your rabbit vaccinated is to prevent them from getting this terrible disease. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, some vets are more expensive than others. But then you don't have to worry about, is this hay okay? Or these greens okay? We had, when Michelle had mentioned that we had done 21 rabbits. And in the beginning, we did what were considered our healthiest. And our healthiest rabbits have dental abscesses and constant stasis and bladder sludge and you name it. We've probably have an animal that has a condition that we're taking care of. But the vaccine didn't bother any of them. The one that we held off on was Danny, who's 14 years and 9 months. 13 years, 9 months, making him older than he is. But then, you kind of think about, okay, I want to protect him. And he does go to a vet every month for acupuncture. So then I had that concern of, all right, suppose he goes to that vet and a dog comes in and, you don't know where that dog's been. So again, the best thing we can do as rabbit owners is vaccinate. That would be my take on that. Then you don't have to worry about the hay. You don't have to worry about, them picking it up from anywhere.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay.
Karen, do we have a list? Someone's asking for a list of places to get vaccinated in New Jersey. Is there such a list that we could maybe provide after the webinar?
Yeah, we can send it out. There's only 3 veterinarians right now that I know of. But yes, we can, if you wanted to send an email to adopt@safehavenrr.org, I'll be happy to share those with you.
Okay.
And again, any licensed veterinarian in the state can reach out to us and get the vaccine. They don't have to be an exotics vet. They don't have to specialize in rabbits. They could be a horse vet. It doesn't matter. They just have to be licensed in the state.
Right. And if your vet doesn't, there's a lot of vets that don't even know what RHD is, let alone know about the vaccine. So call them, tell them what it is and educate them and tell them you want the vaccine. And that's one way, I hope, of bringing the price down a little bit. The more that vets that we have vaccinating, the better off it'll be. And we'll get more rabbits vaccinated.
Agreed, 100%. I do, a few other questions are coming in. So Ashley, do you know if it will be 6 month or annual, or is it still undetermined at this time?
So we are scheduling the 6-month duration of immunity study right now. Mm-hmm. But based on our other vaccines that we have in other species, but again, that same killed Baclovirus vector, so it's the same vaccine technology, we've always seen at least 6 months. So we have no concerns that it won't be at least 6 months, but it's that 12-month that would be maybe not feasible. But 6 months is very comfortable for us, that it'll be fine for 6 months. But a year, that might be stretching the immune response a little too much, but we won't know until we have that data. So,
okay. But there are plans to do the year study. You just,
yes.
Obviously it takes a year.
Yeah, well, it takes over a year. So,
Yeah.
Trying to find, again, locations and sourcing the rabbits, and it's a lot more logistics than we didn't anticipate it to be. So,
all right. Well, this has been, very informative. Thank you so much, Ashley, for your time this evening. I think what we can probably do is, as any other questions that might pop up, please feel free to reach out to adopt@safehavenrr.org. If you have any, if you wake up in the middle of the night with an additional question that you want to ask, we can do our best to compile all the questions and, provide responses to anything that we didn't get to during this webinar. But otherwise, I think we can probably say goodnight, unless there's anything else that you would like to conclude with, Ashley or Karen.
Yes. I would just really like to thank both Ashley and Michelle for doing such a great job. I mean, I thought it was wonderful. And I think even though everybody's on mute, I think we should give them both a round of applause. because it was very informative, very thorough. And I think you've answered all the questions that we got in both prior to the event and as the chat popped up. So I congratulate you both. You did a wonderful job, and thank you very, very much. You did a great thing for the rabbits.
Well, yeah, thank you guys for, approaching me to do this, and we're happy to try to educate everybody on the vaccine. And yeah, we're just happy that we were able to provide a vaccine to help these rabbits, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you guys for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.